A reading from the first book of Samuel. In those days, Saul went down to the desert of Ziph with 3,000 picked men of Israel to search for David in the desert of Ziph. So David and Abishai went among Saul's soldiers by night and found Saul lying asleep within the barricade, with his spear thrust into the ground at his head, and Abner and his men sleeping around him. Abishai whispered to David, "God has delivered your enemy into your grasp this day. Let me nail him to the ground with one thrust of the spear. I will not need a second thrust." But David said to Abishai, "Do not harm him, for who can lay hands on the Lord's anointed and remain unpunished?" So David took the spear and the water jug from their place at Saul's head, and they got away without anyone seeing or knowing or awakening. All remained asleep, because the Lord had put them into a deep slumber. Going across to an opposite slope, David stood on a remote hilltop. At a great distance from Abner, son of Ner, and the troops, he said, "Here is the king's spear. Let an attendant come over to get it. The Lord will reward each man for his justice and faithfulness. Today, though the Lord delivered you into my grasp, I would not harm the Lord's anointed." The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
On his children, so the Lord has A reading from the first letter of St. Paul to the Corinthians. Brothers and sisters, it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living being, the last Adam, a life-giving spirit. But the spiritual was not first, rather the natural and then the spiritual. The first man was from the earth, earthly, the second man from heaven. As was the earthly one, so also are the earthly, and as is the heavenly one, so also are the heavenly. Just as we have borne the image of the earthly one, so shall we also bear the image of the heavenly one. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
May the Lord be upon your heart and your lips to proclaim
Hallelujah.
His holy gospel. In the name of the Father, Son, and
Hallelujah. Hallelujah. I give you a new commandment, says the Lord. Love one another as I have loved you. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah.
The Lord be with you. And with your spirit. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Jesus said to his disciples, "To you who hear I say, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you. To the person who strikes you on one cheek, offer the other one as well. And from the person who takes your cloak, do not withhold even your tunic. Give to everyone who asks of you, and from the one who takes what is yours, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you. For if you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do the same. If you lend money to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners and get back the same amount. But rather love your enemies and do good to them, and lend expecting nothing back. Then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High. For he himself is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Be merciful just as your Father is merciful. Stop judging, and you will not be judged. Stop condemning, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and gifts will be given to you. A good measure, packed together, shaken down, and overflowing, will be poured into your lap. For the measure with which you measure will in turn be measured out to you. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. As a trained rabbi, Jesus knows how to engage his audience and listeners. It's the only way to succeed. Even later on in life, Saul of Tarsus, St. Paul, another trained rabbi, knows how to write letters like the epistle we had tonight from Corinthians, and throughout the ancient world, even Roman senator Cicero, who lived shortly before Christ, a very powerful Roman senator and orator, his oration survived, knows how to stir up a crowd, how to hold interest so people don't drift off. Notice today, for example, how Jesus begins this lesson in the gospel that was just read by the deacon. He starts off with this phrase, "To you who hear me, I say," to you who hear me, I say. Very clever start. Why? It's as if he's hinting in that statement that there might be people in the crowd who ignore him or do not really care what he's going to say. So it's sort of an implicit way of suggesting that his opening is really saying, I'm not talking to you people. I'm only going to talk to people and speak to them who really care about what I have to say. When they hear that, the bait hooks them, and many who are indifferent says, well, I'll show you. I'm going to pay attention. Why do you want me not to listen or something? It gets even better than that. A good teacher or rabbi often asks his audience questions. Many of the narratives or accounts we'll hear all through the year at Sunday Masses, there's a dialogue going on. Sometimes it's an innocent dialogue where a scribe, who's a very learned young man in the Hebrew religion, asks an honest question, and Jesus asks to explain it. That's how the great parable of the Good Samaritan starts. Sometimes his questioners are adversarial. They're trying to trap him up, and they have trick questions, which are rather dishonest there. So he gets them to think by asking questions, and like a good rabbi, sometimes he'll answer your question by asking you another question, just to lead you on. You're hooked into it. Keeps the interest up. So Jesus then asks in the gospel just read another very clever question, because it hooks the audience. He says, in this dialogue about forgiveness and enemies and stuff, he says, if you do thus and so, what credit is that to you? They hear the word credit. Oh, that's important. Why would you bother with religion or religious questions unless somehow there's going to be something in it for you, some benefit that you would gain from it? In fact, people often stop believing in God, or they lose their faith. They don't practice religion anymore because they've decided that it really does not make any difference to them. No benefit in it for them. There's no credit to them. Just move on to something that looks meaningful in life. And when there is no credit for them, they lose interest and they just drift away. So Rabbi Jesus wants to bring them all back because, and especially this powerful gospel, religion does work if you want it to. If you seize its strategies in the modern world or the ancient world, it can make a big difference. It does bring, and that's the whole point, salvation to the world. That's the ultimate credit and benefit. But only it would happen through people who, as he starts off with, you who hear me, this is what I have to say. Now, in this gospel we just heard, Jesus insists upon a new kind of power that we religious people can use in today's world. It can be very psychologically effective and devastating. It's one that Jesus personally practices all the way through to the end in his trial in Holy Week. It's a power easily really at our fingertips if only we choose to use it. The only reason it's not really discovered by people, they wouldn't think this would work. It's just too obvious. And what is this power? It's the power that Jesus mentions and just described. It's really a revolutionary practice in human behavior. Simple words. Love your enemies. Well, people are saying, what? Do good to those who hate you. Are you serious? Bless those who curse you. Do not condemn, and so on. Is he nuts? Why is this so revolutionary? Because, first of all, it really keeps our attention. It flies in the face of current practice in their age, and ours too. Well, the secular world of non-believers often is taught, just from the ground up, of getting even. Tit for tat, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. There is no peace to be found in such a worldly attitude. And when Laura read the Corinthians reading, Paul quietly says, there are two Adams, the earthly Adam, he sinned, he decayed, he goes back to the earth, and everyone else starts off naturally from the earthly Adam. So we do have a tendency to say, you diss me, I'm going to diss you. The payback's coming. That's the earthly Adam. The second Adam, the new Adam, St. Paul describes, is Jesus, and that's what he's doing, creating a new anthropology, a new psychology for us to do. Because the world's thinking over and over, the natural old Adam, only a fool would give pardon or forgiveness to those who offend him. And when revenge, or getting even, or paying back, or settling old scores dominates in people, it goes from individuals into groups. It can rise to the level of mass hatred, violence, and then finally war. There are famous street gangs, even today. A lot of street gangs in LA and other places. They settle scores with rival gangs. If someone's offended, they're going to pay them back. And when this evil continues to rise up to an international level, then we end up with the ultimate world wars. So grow from that love your enemies, or love your neighbor, hate your enemies. The First World War began over a century ago. It was unbelievable in its carnage of loss of life and destruction in Europe. It was completely unnecessary. I spent several years reading about not the war, but what caused something like that to happen at the beginning of the 20th century. It could have been avoided. It solved nothing, but paved the way for an even worse World War 20 years later, when a German dictator invaded several countries in Europe. And it's about to happen again. A possible third world war if Russia, the aggressor, invades the Ukraine. And this is all completely unnecessary. And that's because of the old order of Adam there, that vengefulness, conquest, aggression is still there. And Jesus provides the antidote, but it has to be practiced. There is great power then, and credit and benefit to everybody if Jesus' lesson of forgiveness is put into practice. Not just talk about it, but do it. That's very hard to do. It's actually laced into the Lord's Prayer. We are forced to say it, not forced, but we're urged to say it before we approach the Eucharist. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive others theirs. Or as Jesus ends the gospel, the measuring stick you use to measure other people, I'm going to measure you by your own yardstick when the time comes. But this forgiveness can be put into practice in a very stunning, real way, and it actually does happen. And that's why the first reading was chosen by the church tonight throughout the world. It captures a true life event in history. It's stunning and dramatic. King Saul is a very powerful world leader. He is resting out in the field somewhere, his tents, but his worst enemy is not the Philistines, it's somebody among his own troops. A young, youthful lieutenant, an obedient warrior named David of Bethlehem. At one point, King Saul even promises that David can marry the king's daughter, the princess. Interesting. But there's something wrong in that relationship with Saul and David. Modern dictators today fear and often execute any political rival who might do the job better than they did. And that was true even in Russia when Putin tried to suppress anybody popular who challenged his domineering dictatorial way over Russia. David was on the run from Saul for a similar reason. David had every political reason to kill his rival, King Saul, because the king was after his life and several times attempted to murder David. But David chose not to do this. What he could have done legally, he did not do. The sleeping king awoke from his slumber only to discover two important things, two lessons in life. First of all, he discovered his water jug and his spear were missing. How did they get away from him? And David was at a distance holding them up in his hands, speaking to the king or shouting at him. Saul also discovered that night that his life was spared by the very man who had every right and opportunity to pull it off in slaying him. So Saul was learning the very lesson that David was teaching him. And David was teaching Saul the same lesson that Jesus, who descended from King David centuries later, that Jesus is teaching us tonight in this gospel. A very modern lesson for the world today. Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. This is real power, because it may be hard to do, but it does effect change, as we see. It's a power, though, that raising to the highest levels can change a world that's now on the brink of another war and transform it into a society of justice and of peace. And if that happens, as Jesus asks, what credit is that to you? A big credit to all of us.